The Exploits of Brigadier Gerard. How the Brigadier came to the castle of Gloom. You do very well, my friends, to treat me with some little reverence, for in honouring me you are honouring both France and yourselves. It is not merely an old grey-moustached officer whom you see eating his omelette or draining his glass, but it is a fragment of history. In me you see one of the last of those wonderful men, the men who were veterans when they were yet boys, who learned to use a sword earlier than a razor, and who, during 100 battles, had never once let the enemy see the colour of their knapsacks. For 20 years we were teaching Europe how to fight, and even when they had learned their lesson, it was only the thermometer and never the bayonet which could break the Grand Army down. Berlin, Naples, Vienna, Madrid, Lisbon, Moscow. We stabled our horses in them all. Yes, my friends, I say again that you do well to send your children to me with flowers, for these ears have heard the trumpet calls of France, and these eyes have seen her standards in lands where they may never be seen again. Even now, when I doze in my armchair, I can see those great warriors stream before me, the green-jacketed chasseur, the giant cuirassier, Poniatowski's lancers, the white-mantled dragoons, the nodding bearskins of the horse grenadiers, and then there comes the thick, low rattle of the drums, and through wreaths of dust and smoke I see the line of high bonnets, the row of brown faces, the swing and toss of the long red plumes amid the sloping lines of steel. And there rides Ney, with his red head, and Lefebvre with his bulldog jaw, and Lannes with his Gascon swagger. And then amidst the gleam of brass and the flaunting feathers I catch a glimpse of him, the man with the pale smile, the rounded shoulders, and the far-off eyes. There is an end of my sleep, my friends, for up I spring from my chair with a cracked voice calling and a silly hand outstretched, so that Madame Tito has one more laugh at the old fellow who lives among the shadows. Although I was a full chief of brigade when the wars came to an end, and had every hope of soon being made a general of division, it is still rather to my earlier days that I turn when I wish to talk of the glories and trials of a soldier's life. For you will understand that when an officer has so many men and horses under him, he has his mind full of recruits and remounts, fodder and farriers and quarters, so that even when he is not in the face of the enemy, life is a very serious matter for him. But when he is only a lieutenant or a captain, he has nothing heavier than his epaulets upon his shoulders, so that he can clink his spurs and swing his dolman, drain his glass and kiss his girl, thinking of nothing save of enjoying a gallant life. That is the time when he is likely to have adventures, and it is often to that time that I shall turn in the stories which I may have for you. So it will be tonight when I tell you of my visit to the castle of Gloom, of the strange mission of Sub-Lieutenant Duroc, and of the horrible affair of the man who was once known as Jean Carabin, and afterwards as the Baron Streubenthal. You must know, then, that in the February of 1807, immediately after the taking of Danzig, Major Legendre and I were commissioned to bring 400 remounts from Prussia into eastern Poland. The hard weather, and especially the great battle at Eylau, had killed so many of the horses that there was some danger of our beautiful 10th of Hussars becoming a battalion of light infantry. We knew, therefore, both the Major and I, that we should be very welcome at the front. We did not advance very rapidly, however, for the snow was deep, the roads detestable, and we had but 20 returning invalids to assist us. Besides, it is impossible, when you have a daily change of forage, and sometimes none at all, to move horses faster than a walk. I am aware that in the story books the cavalry whirls past at the maddest of gallops, but for my own part, after 12 campaigns, I should be very satisfied to know that my brigade could always walk upon the march and trot in the presence of the enemy. This I say of the hussars and chasseurs, mark you, so that it is far more the case with cuirassiers or dragoons. For myself, I am fond of horses, and to have 400 of them, of every age and shade and character, all under my own hands, was a very great pleasure to me. They were from Pomerania, for the most part, though some were from Normandy and some from Alsace, and it amused us to notice that they differed in character as much as the people of those provinces. We observed also, what I have often proved since, that the nature of a horse can be told by his colour, from the coquettish light bay, full of fancies and nerves, to the hardy chestnut, and from the docile roan to the pig-headed rusty black. All this has nothing in the world to do with my story, but how is an officer of cavalry to get on with his tale when he finds 400 horses waiting for him at the outset? It is my habit, you see, to talk of that which interests myself, and so I hope that I may interest you. We crossed the Vistula opposite Marienwerder, and had got as far as Riesenberg, when Major Legendre came into my room in the post-house with an open paper in his hand. "You are to leave me," said he, with despair upon his face. It was no very great grief to me to do that, for he was, if I may say so, hardly worthy to have such a subaltern. I saluted, however, in silence. "It is an order from General Lasalle," he continued. "You are to proceed to Rossel instantly, and to report yourself at the headquarters of the regiment." No message could have pleased me better. I was already very well thought of by my superior officers. It was evident to me, therefore, that this sudden order meant that the regiment was about to see service once more, and that Lasalle understood how incomplete my squadron would be without me. It is true that it came at an inconvenient moment, for the keeper of the post-house had a daughter, one of those ivory-skinned, black-haired Polish girls, with whom I had hoped to have some further talk. Still, it is not for the pawn to argue, when the fingers of the player move him from the square. So down I went, saddled my big black charger, Rataplan, and set off instantly upon my lonely journey. My word, it was a treat for those poor Poles and Jews, who have so little to brighten their dull lives, to see such a picture as that before their doors. The frosty morning air made Rataplan's great black limbs and the beautiful curves of his back and sides gleam and shimmer with every gambade. As for me, the rattle of hoofs upon a road, and the jingle of bridle chains which comes with every toss of a saucy head, would even now set my blood dancing through my veins. You may think, then, how I carried myself in my 25th year, I, Etienne Gerard, the picked horseman and surest blade in the 10 regiments of hussars. Blue was our colour in the 10th, a sky-blue dolman and pelisse with a scarlet front. And it was said of us in the army that we could set a whole population running, the women towards us and the men away. There were bright eyes in the Riesenberg windows that morning which seemed to beg me to tarry. But what can a soldier do save to kiss his hand and shake his bridle as he rides upon his way? It was a bleak season to ride through the poorest and ugliest country in Europe. But there was a cloudless sky above, and a bright cold sun, which shimmered on the huge snowfields. My breath reeked into the frosty air, and Rataplan sent up 2 feathers of steam from his nostrils, while the icicles drooped from the side-irons of his bit. I let him trot to warm his limbs, while for my own part I had too much to think of to give much heed to the cold. To north and south stretched the great plains, mottled over with dark clumps of fir and lighter patches of larch. A few cottages peeped out here and there, but it was only 3 months since the Grand Army had passed that way, and you know what that meant to a country. The Poles were our friends, it was true, but out of 100,000 men only the Guard had wagons, and the rest had to live as best they might. It did not surprise me, therefore, to see no signs of cattle, and no smoke from the silent houses. A wheel had been left across the country where the great host had passed, and it was said that even the rats were starved wherever the Emperor had led his men. By midday I had got as far as the village of Saalfeld, but as I was on the direct road for Osterode, where the Emperor was wintering, and also for the main camp of the 7 divisions of infantry, the highway was choked with carriages and carts. What with artillery caissons and wagons and couriers, and the ever-thickening stream of recruits and stragglers, it seemed to me that it would be a very long time before I should join my comrades. The plains, however, were 5 feet deep in snow, so there was nothing for it but to plod upon our way. It was with joy, therefore, that I found a second road which branched away from the other, trending through a fir wood towards the north. There was a small auberge at the crossroads, and a patrol of the 3rd Hussars of Conflans, the very regiment of which I was afterwards colonel, were mounting their horses at the door. On the steps stood their officer, a slight, pale young man, who looked more like a young priest from a seminary than a leader of the devil-may-care rascals before him. "Good day, sir," said he, seeing that I pulled up my horse. "Good day," I answered. "I am Lieutenant Etienne Gerard, of the 10th. I could see by his face that he had heard of me. Everybody had heard of me, since my duel with the 6 fencing masters. My manner, however, served to put him at his ease with me. "I am Sub-Lieutenant Duroc, of the 3rd, said he. "Newly joined?" I asked. "Last week." I had thought as much, from his white face, and from the way in which he let his men lounge upon their horses. It was not so long, however, since I had learned myself what it was like when a schoolboy has to give orders to veteran troops. It made me blush, I remember, to shout abrupt commands to men who had seen more battles than I had years. And it would have come more natural for me to say, "With your permission, we shall now wheel into line," or, "If you think it is best, we shall trot." I did not think the less of the lad, therefore, when I observed that his men were somewhat out of hand, but I gave them a glance which stiffened them in their saddles. "May I ask, monsieur, whether you are going by this northern road?" I asked. "My orders are to patrol it as far as Arensdorf," said he. "Then I will, with your permission, ride so far with you," said I. "It is very clear that the longer way will be the faster." So it proved, for this road led away from the army into a country which was given over to Cossacks and marauders, and it was as bare as the other was crowded. Duroc and I rode in front, with our 6 troopers clattering in the rear. He was a good boy, this Duroc, with his head full of the nonsense that they teach at Saint-Cyr, knowing more about Alexander and Pompey than how to mix a horse's fodder, or care for a horse's feet. Still, he was, as I have said, a good boy, unspoiled as yet by the camp. It pleased me to hear him prattle away about his sister Marie, and about his mother in Amiens. Presently we found ourselves at the village of Hayenau. Duroc rode up to the post-house and asked to see the master. "Can you tell me," said he, "whether the man who calls himself the Baron Streubenthal lives in these parts?" The postmaster shook his head, and we rode upon our way. I took no notice of this, but when, at the next village, my comrade repeated the same question with the same result, I could not help asking him who this Baron Streubenthal might be. "Here's a man," said Duroc, with a sudden flush upon his boyish face, "to whom I have a very important message to convey." Well, this was not satisfactory, but there was something in my companion's manner which told me that any further questioning would be distasteful to him. I said nothing more, therefore, but Duroc would still ask every peasant whom we met whether he could give him any news of the Baron Streubenthal. For my own part, I was endeavouring, as an officer of light cavalry should, to form an idea of the lay of the country, to note the course of the streams, to mark the places where there should be fords. Every step was taking us farther from the camp, round the flanks of which we were travelling. Far to the south, a few plumes of grey smoke in the frosty air marked the position of some of our outposts. To the north, however, there was nothing between ourselves and the Russian winter quarters. Twice on the extreme horizon I caught a glimpse of the glitter of steel, and pointed it out to my companion. It was too distant for us to tell whence it came, but we had little doubt that it was from the lance-heads of marauding Cossacks. The sun was just setting when we rode over a low hill and saw a small village upon our right, and on our left a high black castle which jutted out from amongst the pine woods. A farmer with his cart was approaching us, a matted-haired, downcast fellow, in a sheepskin jacket. "What village is this?" asked Duroc. "It is Arensdorf," he answered, in his barbarous German dialect. "Then here I am to stay the night," said my young companion. Then, turning to the farmer, he asked his eternal question. "Can you tell me where the Baron Streubenthal lives?" "Why, it is he who owns the castle of Gloom," said the farmer, pointing to the dark turrets over the distant fir forest. Duroc gave a shout like the sportsman who sees his game rising in front of him. The lad seemed to have gone off his head, his eyes shining, his face deathly white, and such a grim set about his mouth as made the farmer shrink away from him. I can see him now, leaning forward on his brown horse, with his eager gaze fixed upon the great black tower. "Why do you call it the Castle of Gloom?" I asked. "Well, it's the name it bears upon the countryside," said the farmer. "By all accounts there have been some black doings up yonder. It's not for nothing that the wickedest man in Poland has been living there these 14 years past." "A Polish nobleman?" I asked. "Nay, we breed no such men in Poland," he answered. "A Frenchman, then?" cried Duroc. "They say that he came from France." "And with red hair?" "As red as a fox." Yes, it is my man," cried my companion, quivering all over in his excitement. "It is the hand of Providence which has led me here. Who can say that there is not justice in this world? Come, Monsieur Gerard, for I must see the men safely quartered before I can attend to this private matter." He spurred on his horse, and 10 minutes later we were at the door of the inn at Arensdorf, where his men were to find their quarters for the night. Well, all this was no affair of mine, and I could not imagine what the meaning of it might be. Rossel was still far off, but I determined to ride on for a few hours, and take my chance of some wayside barn, in which I could find shelter for Rataplan and myself. I had mounted my horse, therefore, after tossing off a cup of wine, when young Duroc came running out of the door, and laid his hand upon my knee. "Monsieur Gerard," he panted, "I beg of you not to abandon me like this." "My good sir," said I, "if you would tell me what is the matter, and what you wish me to do, I should be better able to tell you if I could be of any assistance to you." "You can be of the very greatest," he cried. "Indeed, from all that I have heard of you, Monsieur Gerard, you are the one man whom I should wish to have by my side tonight." "You forget that I am riding to join my regiment." "You cannot in any case reach it tonight. Tomorrow will bring you to Rossel. By staying with me you will confer the very greatest kindness upon me, and you will aid me in a matter which concerns my own honour and the honour of my family. I am compelled, however, to confess to you that some personal danger may possibly be involved." It was a crafty thing for him to say. Of course I sprang from Rataplan's back and ordered the groom to lead him back into the stables. "Come into the inn," said I, "and let me know exactly what it is that you wish me to do." He led the way into a sitting-room and fastened the door lest we should be interrupted. He was a well-grown lad, and as he stood in the glare of the lamp, with the light beating upon his earnest face and upon his uniform of silver grey, which suited him to a marvel, I felt my heart warm towards him. Without going so far as to say that he carried himself as I had done at his age, there was at least similarity enough to make me feel in sympathy with him. "I can explain it all in a few words," said he. "If I have not already satisfied your very natural curiosity, it is because the subject is so painful a one to me that I can hardly bring myself to allude to it. I cannot, however, ask for your assistance without explaining to you exactly how the matter lies. You must know, then, that my father was the well-known banker, Christophe Duroc, who was murdered by the people during the September massacres. As you are aware, the mob took possession of the prisons, chose 3 so-called judges to pass sentence upon the unhappy aristocrats, and then tore them to pieces when they were passed out into the street. My father had been a benefactor of the poor all his life. There were many to plead for him. He had the fever, too, and was carried in half dead upon a blanket. 2 of the judges were in favour of acquitting him. The third, a young Jacobin, whose huge body and brutal mind had made him a leader amongst these wretches, dragged him with his own hands from the litter, kicked him again and again with his heavy boots, and hurled him out of the door, where in an instant he was torn limb from limb, under circumstances which are too horrible for me to describe. This, as you perceive, was murder, even under their own unlawful laws, for 2 of their own judges had pronounced in my father's favour. Well, when the days of order came back again, my elder brother began to make inquiries about this man. I was only a child then, but it was a family matter, and it was discussed in my presence. The fellow's name was Carabin. He was one of Saint-Stairs' guard, and a noted duellist. A foreign lady named the Baroness Streubenthal having been dragged before the Jacobins, he had gained her liberty for her, on the promise that she, with her money and estates, should be his. He had married her, taken her name and title, and escaped out of France at the time of the fall of Robespierre. What had become of him we had no means of learning. You will think, doubtless, that it would be very easy for us to find him, since we had both his name and his title. You must remember, however, that the Revolution left us without money, and that without money such a search is very difficult. Then came the Empire, and it became more difficult still, for, as you are aware, the Emperor considered that the 18th Brumaire brought all accounts to a settlement, and that on that day a veil had been drawn across the past. Nonetheless, we kept our own family story and our own family plans. My brother joined the army and passed with it through all southern Europe, asking everywhere for the Baron Streubenthal. Last October he was killed at Jena, with his mission still unfulfilled. Then it became my turn, and I have the good fortune to hear of the very man of whom I am in search, at one of the first Polish villages which I have to visit, and within a fortnight of joining my regiment. And then, to make the matter even better, I find myself in the company of one whose name is never mentioned throughout the army, save in connection with some daring and generous deed. This was all very well, and I listened to it with the greatest interest, but I was none the clearer as to what young Duroc wished me to do. "How can I be of service to you?" I asked. "By coming up with me. To the castle? Precisely. When?" "At once. But what do you intend to do?" "I shall know what to do, but I wish you to be with me all the same." Well, it was never in my nature to refuse an adventure, and, besides, I had every sympathy with the lad's feelings. It is very well to forgive one's enemies, but one wishes to give them something to forgive also. I held out my hand to him, therefore. "I must be on my way for Rossel tomorrow morning, but tonight I'm yours," said I. We left our troopers in snug quarters, and, as it was but a mile to the castle, we did not disturb our horses. To tell the truth, I hate to see a cavalryman walk, and I hold that just as he is the most gallant thing upon earth when he has his saddle flaps between his knees, so he is the most clumsy when he has to loop up his sabre and his sabre-tash in one hand, and turn in his toes for fear of catching the rowels of his spurs. Still, Duroc and I were of the age when one can carry things off, and I dare swear that no woman, at least, would have quarrelled with the appearance of the two young hussars, one in blue and one in grey, who set out that night from the Arensdorf post-house. We both carried our swords, and for my own part I slipped a pistol from my holster into the inside of my pelisse, for it seemed to me that there might be some wild work before us. The track which led to the castle wound through a pitch-black fir wood, where we could see nothing save the ragged patch of stars above our heads. Presently, however, it opened up, and there was the castle right in front of us, about as far as a carbine would carry. It was a huge, uncouth place, and bore every mark of being exceedingly old, with turrets at every corner, and a square keep on the side which was nearest to us. In all its great shadow there was no sign of light save from a single window, and no sound came from it. To me there was something awful in its size and its silence, which corresponded so well with its sinister name. My companion pressed on eagerly, and I followed him along the ill-kept path which led to the gate. There was no bell or knocker upon the great iron-studded door, and it was only by pounding with the hilts of our sabres that we could attract attention. A thin hawk-faced man with a beard up to his temples opened it at last. He carried a lantern in one hand, and in the other a chain which held an enormous black hound. His manner at the first moment was threatening, but the sight of our uniforms and of our faces turned it into one of sulky reserve. "The Baron Streubenthal does not receive visitors at so late an hour," said he, speaking in very excellent French. "You can inform Baron Streubenthal that I have come 800 leagues to see him, and that I will not leave until I have done so," said my companion. I could not myself have said it with a better voice and manner. The fellow took a sidelong look at us, and tugged at his black beard in his perplexity. "To tell the truth, gentlemen," said he, "the Baron has a cup or two of wine in him at this hour, and you would certainly find him a more entertaining companion if you were to come again in the morning." He had opened the door a little wider as he spoke, and I saw by the light of the lamp in the hall behind him that 3 other rough fellows were standing there, one of whom held another of these monstrous hounds. Duroc must have seen it also, but it made no difference to his resolution. "Enough talk," said he, pushing the man to one side. "It is with your master that I have to deal." The fellows in the hall made way for him as he strode in among them. So great is the power of one man who knows what he wants, over several who are not sure of themselves. My companion tapped one of them upon the shoulder with as much assurance as though he owned him. "Show me to the Baron," said he. The man shrugged his shoulders and answered something in Polish. The fellow with the beard, who had shut and barred the front door, appeared to be the only one among them who could speak French. "Well, you shall have your way," said he with a sinister smile. "You shall see the Baron, and perhaps, before you have finished, you will wish that you had taken my advice." We followed him down the hall, which was stone-flagged and very spacious, with skins scattered upon the floor, and the heads of wild beasts upon the walls. At the farther end he threw open a door, and we entered. It was a small room, scantily furnished, with the same marks of neglect and decay which met us at every turn. The walls were hung with discoloured tapestry, which had come loose at one corner, so as to expose the rough stonework behind. A second door, hung with a curtain, faced us upon the other side. Between lay a square table, strewn with dirty dishes and the sordid remains of a meal. Several bottles were scattered over it. At the head of it, and facing us, there sat a huge man with a lion-like head and a great shock of orange-coloured hair. His beard was of the same glaring hue, matted and tangled, and coarse as a horse's mane. I've seen some strange faces in my time, but never one more brutal than that, with its small vicious blue eyes, its white crumpled cheeks, and the thick, hanging lip which protruded over his monstrous beard. His head swayed about on his shoulders, and he looked at us with the vague, dim gaze of a drunken man. Yet he was not so drunk but that our uniforms carried their message to him. "Well, my brave boys," he hiccuped. "What is the latest news from Paris, eh? You're going to free Poland, I hear, and have meantime all become slaves yourselves, slaves to a little aristocrat with his grey coat and his three-cornered hat. No more citizens either, I am told, and nothing but monsieur and madame. My faith, some more heads will have to roll into the sawdust basket some of these mornings." Duroc advanced in silence and stood by the ruffian's side. "Jean Carabin?" said he. The Baron started, and the film of drunkenness seemed to be clearing from his eyes. "Jean Carabin?" said Duroc once more. He sat up and grasped the arms of his chair. "What do you mean by repeating that name, young man?" he asked. "Jean Carabin, you are a man whom I have long wished to meet. Supposing that I once had such a name, how can it concern you, since you must have been a child when I bore it?" "My name is Duroc." "Not the son of the man you murdered." The Baron tried to laugh, but there was terror in his eyes. "We must let bygones be bygones, young man," he cried. "It was our life or theirs in those days, the aristocrats or the people. Your father was of the Gironde. He fell. I was of the Mountain. Most of my comrades fell. It was all the fortune of war. We must forget all this and learn to know each other better, you and I." He held out a red, twitching hand as he spoke. "Enough," said young Duroc. "If I were to pass my sabre through you as you sit in that chair, I should do what is just and right. I dishonour my blade by crossing it with yours, and yet you are a Frenchman, and have even held a commission under the same flag as myself. Rise, then, and defend yourself." "Tut, tut," cried the Baron. "It's all very well for you young bloods." Duroc's patience could stand no more. He swung his open hand into the centre of the great orange beard. I saw a lip fringed with blood, and two glaring blue eyes above it. "You shall die for that blow." "That is better," said Duroc. "My sabre!" cried the other. "I will not keep you waiting, I promise you." And he hurried from the room. I have said that there was a second door covered with a curtain. Hardly had the Baron vanished when there ran from behind it a woman, young and beautiful. So swiftly and noiselessly did she move that she was between us in an instant, and it was only the shaking curtains which told us whence she had come. "I have seen it all," she cried. "Oh, sir, you have carried yourself splendidly." She stooped to my companion's hand and kissed it again and again, ere he could disengage it from her grasp. "Nay, madame, why should you kiss my hand?" he cried. "Because it is the hand which struck him on his vile, lying mouth, because it may be the hand which will avenge my mother. I am his stepdaughter. The woman whose heart he broke was my mother. Oh, I loathe him, I fear him. Ah, there is his step." In an instant she had vanished as suddenly as she had come. A moment later the Baron entered with a drawn sword in his hand, and the fellow who had admitted us at his heels. "This is my secretary," said he. "He will be my friend in this affair, but we shall need more elbow room than we can find here. Perhaps you will kindly come with me to a more spacious apartment." It was evidently impossible to fight in a chamber which was blocked by a great table. We followed him out, therefore, into the dimly lit hall. At the farther end a light was shining through an open door. "We shall find what we want in here," said the man with the dark beard. It was a large empty room, with rows of barrels and cases round the walls. A strong lamp stood upon a shelf in the corner. The floor was level and true, so that no swordsman could ask for more. Duroc drew his sabre and sprang into it. The Baron stood back with a bow and motioned me to follow my companion. Hardly were my heels over the threshold when the heavy door crashed behind us and the key screamed in the lock. We were taken in a trap. For a moment we could not realize it. Such incredible baseness was outside all our experiences. Then, as we understood how foolish we had been to trust for an instant a man with such a history, a flush of rage came over us, rage against his villainy, and against our own stupidity. We rushed at the door together, beating it with our fists and kicking with our heavy boots. The sound of our blows and of our execrations must have resounded through the castle. We called to this villain, hurling at him every name which might pierce even into his hardened soul. But the door was enormous. Such a door as one finds in medieval castles, made of huge beams clamped together with iron. It was as easy to break as a square of the old guard. And our cries appeared to be of as little avail as our blows, for they only brought for answer the clattering echoes from the high roof above us. When you have done some soldiering, you soon learn to put up with what cannot be altered. It was I, then, who first recovered my calmness and prevailed upon Duroc to join with me in examining the apartment which had become our dungeon. There was only one window, which had no glass in it, and was so narrow that one could not so much as get one's head through. It was high up, and Duroc had to stand upon a barrel in order to see from it. "What can you see?" I asked. "Fir woods and an avenue of snow between them," said he. "Ah!" He gave a cry of surprise. I sprang upon the barrel beside him. There was, as he said, a long, clear strip of snow in front. A man was riding down it, flogging his horse and galloping like a madman. As we watched, he grew smaller and smaller, until he was swallowed up by the black shadows of the forest. "What does that mean?" asked Duroc. "No good for us," said I. "He may have gone for some brigands to cut our throats. Let us see if we cannot find a way out of this mouse-trap before the cat can arrive." The one piece of good furniture in our favour was that beautiful lamp. It was nearly full of oil and would last us until morning. In the dark our situation would have been far more difficult. By its light we proceeded to examine the packages and cases which lined the walls. In some places there was only a single line of them, while in one corner they were piled nearly to the ceiling. It seemed that we were in the storehouse of the castle, for there were a great number of cheeses, vegetables of various kinds, bins full of dried fruits, and a line of wine barrels. One of these had a spigot in it, and as I had eaten little during the day, I was glad of a cup of claret and some food. As to Duroc, he would take nothing, but paced up and down the floor in a fever of anger and impatience. "I'll have them yet," he cried, every now and then. "The rascal shall not escape me." This was all very well, but it seemed to me, as I sat on a great round cheese, eating my supper, that this youngster was thinking rather too much of his own family affairs, and too little of the fine scrape into which he had got me. After all, his father had been dead 14 years, and nothing could set that right. But here was Etienne Gerard, the most dashing lieutenant in the whole Grand Army, in imminent danger of being cut off at the very outset of his brilliant career. Who was ever to know the heights to which I might have risen if I were knocked on the head in this hole-and-corner business? which had nothing whatever to do with France or the Emperor. I could not help thinking what a fool I had been, when I had a fine war before me and everything which a man could desire, to go off on a harebrained expedition of this sort, as if it were not enough to have 250,000 Russians to fight against, without plunging into all sorts of private quarrels as well. "That is all very well," I said at last, as I heard Duroc muttering his threats. "You may do what you like to him, when you get the upper hand. At present, the question rather is, what is he going to do to us?" "Let him do his worst," cried the boy. "I owe a duty to my father." "That is mere foolishness," said I. "If you owe a duty to your father, I owe one to my mother, which is to get out of this business safe and sound." My remark brought him to his senses. "I have thought too much of myself," he cried. "Forgive me, Monsieur Gerard. Give me your advice as to what I should do." "Well," said I, "it is not for our health that they have shut us up here among the cheeses. They mean to make an end of us if they can, that is certain. They hope that no one knows that we have come here, and that none will trace us if we remain. Do your hussars know where you have gone to?" I said nothing. It is clear that we cannot be starved here. They must come to us if they are to kill us. Behind a barricade of barrels we could hold our own against the 5 rascals whom we have seen. That is probably why they have sent that messenger for assistance. We must get out before he returns, precisely, if we are to get out at all. "Could we not burn down this door?" he cried. "Nothing could be easier," said I. "There are several casks of oil in the corner. My only objection is that we should ourselves be nicely toasted, like 2 little oyster pâtés." "Can you not suggest something?" he cried in despair. "Ah, what is that?" There had been a low sound at our little window, and a shadow came between the stars and ourselves. A small white hand was stretched into the lamplight. Something glittered between the fingers. "Quick, quick!" cried a woman's voice. We were on the barrel in an instant. "They have sent for the Cossacks. Your lives are at stake. Ah, I am lost! I am lost!" There was the sound of rushing steps, a hoarse oath, a blow, and the stars were once more twinkling through the window. We stood helpless upon the barrel, with our blood cold with horror. Half a minute afterwards we heard a smothered scream, ending in a choke. A great door slammed somewhere in the silent night. "Those ruffians have seized her! They will kill her!" I cried. Duroc sprang down, with the inarticulate shouts of one whose reason has left him. He struck the door so frantically with his naked hands that he left a blotch of blood with every blow. "Here is the key," I shouted, picking one from the floor. "She must have thrown it in at the instant that she was torn away." My companion snatched it from me with a shriek of joy. A moment later he dashed it down upon the boards. It was so small that it was lost in the enormous lock. Duroc sank upon one of the boxes with his head between his hands. He sobbed in his despair. I could have sobbed too, when I thought of the woman, and how helpless we were to save her. But I am not easily baffled. After all, this key must have been sent to us for a purpose. The lady could not bring us that of the door, because this murderous stepfather of hers would most certainly have it in his pocket. Yet this must have a meaning. Or why should she risk her life to place it in our hands? It would say little of our wits if we could not find out what that meaning might be. I set to work moving all the cases out from the wall, and Duroc, gaining new hope from my courage, helped me with all his strength. It was no light task, for many of them were large and heavy. On we went, working like maniacs, slinging barrels, cheeses, and boxes pell-mell into the middle of the room. At last there only remained one huge barrel of vodka, which stood in the corner. With our united strength we rolled it out, and there was a little low wooden door in the wainscot behind it. The key fitted, and with a cry of delight we saw it swing open before us. With the lamp in my hand, I squeezed my way in, followed by my companion. We were in the powder magazine of the castle, a rough walled cellar with barrels all round it, and one with the top staved in the centre. The powder from it lay in a black heap upon the floor. Beyond there was another door, but it was locked. "We are no better off than before," cried Duroc. "We have no key." "We have a dozen," I cried. "Where?" I pointed to the line of powder barrels. "You would blow this door open?" "Precisely." "But you would explode the magazine." It was true, but I was not at the end of my resources. "We will blow open the storeroom door," I cried. I ran back and seized a tin box which had been filled with candles. It was about the size of my busby, large enough to hold several pounds of powder. Duroc filled it while I cut off the end of a candle. When we had finished it, it would have puzzled a colonel of engineers to make a better petard. I put 3 cheeses on the top of each other and placed it above them, so as to lean against the lock. Then we lit our candle end and ran for shelter, shutting the door of the magazine behind us. It is no joke, my friends, to be among all those tons of powder, with the knowledge that if the flame of the explosion should penetrate through one thin door, our blackened limbs would be shot higher than the castle keep. Who could have believed that a half-inch of candle could take so long to burn? My ears were straining all the time for the thudding of the hooves of the Cossacks who were coming to destroy us. I had almost made up my mind that the candle must have gone out, when there was a smack like a bursting bomb. Our door flew to bits, and pieces of cheese, with a shower of turnips, apples, and splinters of cases, were shot in among us. As we rushed out, we had to stagger through an impenetrable smoke, with all sorts of debris beneath our feet. But there was a glimmering square, where the dark door had been. The petard had done its work. In fact, it had done more for us than we had even ventured to hope. It had shattered jailers as well as jail. The first thing that I saw as I came out into the hall was a man with a butcher's axe in his hand, lying flat upon his back, with a gaping wound across his forehead. The second was a huge dog, with 2 of its legs broken, twisting in agony upon the floor. As it raised itself up, I saw the 2 broken ends flapping like flails. At the same instant I heard a cry, and there was Duroc, thrown against the wall, with the other hound's teeth in his throat. He pushed it off with his left hand, while again and again he passed his sabre through its body. But it was not until I blew out its brains with my pistol that the iron jaws relaxed, and the fierce bloodshot eyes were glazed in death. There was no time for us to pause. A woman's scream from in front, a scream of mortal terror, told us that even now we might be too late. There were 2 other men in the hall, but they cowered away from our drawn swords and furious faces. The blood was streaming from Duroc's neck and dyeing the grey fur of his pelisse. Such was the lad's fire, however, that he shot in front of me, and it was only over his shoulder that I caught a glimpse of the scene as we rushed into the chamber in which we had first seen the master of the castle of Gloom. The Baron was standing in the middle of the room, his tangled mane bristling like an angry lion. He was, as I have said, a huge man with enormous shoulders, and as he stood there, with his face flushed with rage and his sword advanced, I could not but think that, in spite of all his villainies, he had a proper figure for a grenadier. The lady lay cowering in a chair behind him. A wheal across one of her white arms and a dog-whip upon the floor were enough to show that our escape had hardly been in time to save her from his brutality. He gave a howl like a wolf as we broke in, and was upon us in an instant, hacking and driving, with a curse at every blow. I have already said that the room gave no space for swordsmanship. My young companion was in front of me in the narrow passage between the table and the wall, so that I could only look on without being able to aid him. The lad knew something of his weapon, and was as fierce and active as a wild cat, but in so narrow a space the weight and strength of the giant gave him the advantage. Besides, he was an admirable swordsman. His parade and riposte were as quick as lightning. Twice he touched Duroc upon the shoulder, and then, as the lad slipped on a lunge, he whirled up his sword to finish him before he could recover his feet. I was quicker than he, however, and took the cut upon the pommel of my sabre. "Excuse me," said I, "but you have still to deal with Etienne Gerard." He drew back and leaned against the tapestry-covered wall, breathing in little hoarse gasps, for his foul living was against him. "Take your breath," said I. "I will await your convenience." "You have no cause of quarrel against me," he panted. "I owe you some little attention," said I, "for having shut me up in your storeroom. Besides, if all other were wanting, I see cause enough upon that lady's arm." "Have your way, then," he snarled, and leapt at me like a madman. For a minute I saw only the blazing blue eyes, and the red glazed point which stabbed and stabbed, rasping off to right or to left, and yet ever back at my throat and my breast. I had never thought that such good sword-play was to be found at Paris in the days of the Revolution. I do not suppose that in all my little affairs I have met 6 men who had a better knowledge of their weapon. But he knew that I was his master. He read death in my eyes, and I could see that he read it. The flush died from his face. His breath came in shorter and in thicker gasps, yet he fought on, even after the final thrust had come, and died still hacking and cursing, with foul cries upon his lips, and his blood clotting upon his orange beard. I, who speak to you, have seen so many battles that my old memory can scarce contain their names, and yet of all the terrible sights which these eyes have rested upon, there is none which I care to think of less than of that orange beard, with the crimson stain in the centre, from which I had drawn my sword point. It was only afterwards that I had time to think of all this. His monstrous body had hardly crashed down upon the floor before the woman in the corner sprang to her feet, clapping her hands together and screaming out in her delight. For my part, I was disgusted to see a woman take such delight in a deed of blood, and I gave no thought as to the terrible wrongs which must have befallen her before she could so far forget the gentleness of her sex. It was on my tongue to tell her sharply to be silent, when a strange choking smell took the breath from my nostrils, and a sudden yellow glare brought out the figures upon the faded hangings. "Duroc! Duroc!" I shouted, tugging at his shoulder. "The castle is on fire!" The boy lay senseless upon the ground, exhausted by his wounds. I rushed out into the hall to see whence the danger came. It was our explosion which had set alight to the dry framework of the door. Inside the storeroom, some of the boxes were already blazing. I glanced in, and as I did so my blood was turned to water by the sight of the powder barrels beyond, and of the loose heap upon the floor. It might be seconds, it could not be more than minutes, before the flames would be at the edge of it. These eyes will be closed in death, my friends, before they cease to see those crawling lines of fire and the black heap beyond. How little I can remember what followed. Vaguely I can recall how I rushed into the chamber of death, how I seized Duroc by one limp hand and dragged him down the hall, the woman keeping pace with me and pulling at the other arm. Out of the gateway we rushed, and on down the snow-covered path until we were on the fringe of the fir forest. It was at that moment that I heard a crash behind me, and glancing round saw a great spout of fire shoot up into the wintry sky. An instant later there seemed to come a second crash, far louder than the first. I saw the fir trees and the stars whirling round me, and I fell unconscious across the body of my comrade. It was some weeks before I came to myself in the post-house of Arensdorf, and longer still before I could be told all that had befallen me. It was Duroc, already able to go soldiering, who came to my bedside and gave me an account of it. He it was who told me how a piece of timber had struck me on the head, and laid me almost dead upon the ground. From him, too, I learned how the Polish girl had run to Arensdorf, how she had roused our hussars, and how she had only just brought them back in time to save us from the spears of the Cossacks, who had been summoned from their bivouac by that same black-bearded secretary whom we had seen galloping so swiftly over the snow. As to the brave lady who had twice saved our lives, I could not learn very much about her at that moment from Duroc. But when I chanced to meet him in Paris 2 years later, after the campaign of Wagram, I was not very much surprised to find that I needed no introduction to his bride, and that by the queer turns of fortune he had himself, had he chosen to use it, that very name and title of the Baron Streubenthal, which showed him to be the owner of the blackened ruins of the castle of Gloom. That is the end of The Castle of Gloom, from the Exploits of Brigadier Gerard, read by Greg Wagland for Magpie Audio, 2024. Thank you for listening.